Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Look, I'm just going to respond to a few of the things that the member for Sturt was saying in relation to the annual climate change statement, which of course raises the question of how Australia makes progress to its commitment to net zero by 2050, a commitment made by the current government. It wasn't something that the former government had any strong interest in, and the member for Sturt has just come and talked really exclusively about how nuclear energy is required to get there, and he said a few things that I think should be rebutted. And the first is around having a debate. I mean, I'm going to give him the debate that he asked for, and it's just one of many debates that's occurred on this issue. In fact, it's pretty much an ongoing conversation. There was a Ziggy Switkowski review under the Howard government in 2006. There was a Royal Commission, I think, in South Australia. There have been multiple committee inquiries, and in fact, in the last parliament there was an inquiry that the former government caused to be undertaken by the Environment and Energy Committee that the member for Warringah and myself were on. I was the deputy chair of the committee. It was chaired by the opposition energy spokesperson. It was on the viability of civilian nuclear energy, and it concluded that it wasn't viable at this stage. I think all it could bring itself to say from the point of view of the government members was that this idea of small modular reactors should just be kept somewhere on the blackboard to be thought about from time to time. But there were no steps taken by the former government to deal with the EPBC, very sensible EPBC prohibition of civilian nuclear power in Australia that was put in place under the Howard government. Again, there were no steps by the former government to do that, just as there were no steps taken further down the path of nuclear energy, just as there was no actual national energy policy of any kind. We have been watching the Nemesis program. It was a reminder of the terrible knot that the former government got itself into around the National Energy Guarantee. It was probably the closest thing they got, to a national policy. There were 22 energy policies that they toyed with. I think the NEG was the one that they got closest to and failed to deliver. So now that they're in opposition, of course, the energy policy they have is bring in nuclear. One of the reasons you don't take the prohibition away is that the first thing you would need if we were to contemplate civilian nuclear in this country is the whole apparatus that would go around governing it. And I'd encourage the member for Sturt and anyone else who thinks that would be a good idea to go and look at the annual budget for that regulation and all the associated agencies in the United States. It runs to tens of millions of dollars, tens upon tens upon tens of millions of dollars. That's the first thing that you'd have to do. And then, of course, you'd have the Nuclear White Shoe Brigade sniffing around for every little bit of money that they could get for all of these wild pilot projects and other kinds of wild goose chases, frankly. The member for Sturt belled the cat. I mean, he argued against himself, I thought, pretty well when he mentioned that nuclear technology, frankly, hasn't changed in 70 years. It's not a new industry, and we've been told over and over again for literally the last 30 years that the next amazing magic generation of nuclear technology would arrive that would be safe and cheap and all of these other things, and it just doesn't occur. The renewable energy and those related technologies provides the starkest contrast that you can imagine, because the learning curve, the improvement in efficiency, the improvement in technology and the cost curve is there for all to see. The stuff keeps getting cheaper and it keeps getting better and more effective. Now, nuclear just hasn't been that kind of technology, and there's no good pointing the finger and trying to blame other people for it. That's just the nature of the beast. And the fascination that those opposite have developed or been sucked into, in my view, around small modular reactors is part of that problem. We looked at that very closely in the inquiry I talked about before, and the CSIRO gen cost analysis showed that small modular reactors are not going to be all that different in their exorbitant costs, capital costs and operating costs, than the existing nuclear fleet, the existing larger scale nuclear technology. And some of the darlings of the SMR fantasists like the NuScale project in the United States, since the time we had that inquiry, have literally fallen apart. I mean, when we had that inquiry and the chair, the now opposition energy spokesperson and other nuclear devotees were falling over themselves to get NuScale to present to us, and they did. They gave evidence to that inquiry and they put forward all of the usual nuclear pie-in-the-sky vendor claims about how little it would cost and the price at which NuScale would be able to deliver nuclear generated electricity. And then as the next few years went on, between 2019 and now, there was a series of updates, and every update, the project timeline went out by another 2 or 3 years, the capital costs went up by another few billion, and the operating costs went up by several tens of dollars per megawatt hour, until eventually, not that long ago, late last year, NuScale went poof and disappeared. The project fell over because it was frankly not viable. They gave an update to the market. Capital costs had gone up 2.5. Operating costs, or the delivery price of electricity, even with the subsidy that the new Inflation Reduction Act of the Biden administration provided, still put it at an exorbitant cost, not faintly comparable to what's being delivered by wind and solar, and at about exactly the same as what you'd get from coal or gas, but with incredibly long and uncertain timelines and massive capital costs. So that's the reality of the SMR fantasy. It doesn't exist. People can make whatever claims they want about it. The Darling project, the NuScale project that the member for Fairfax, someone want to go back through Hansard and just do a search on NuScale for the member for Fairfax. My God, there'll be love letters in every one of those leather-bound volumes that we get in our offices or in the bookshelves around here about NuScale and what a wonderful thing it's going to turn out to be. That project is defunct. That project has gone because it didn't stack up, and that's the reality of nuclear. So if the member for Sturt thinks that it's a clever thing for Australia to waste time and waste money by putting time and energy and hopes into nuclear technology, it's a bizarre proposition, and it seems to be the only proposition when it comes to our energy and emission reduction strategy that those opposite have. A technology that is ferociously expensive, a technology that takes a long time. Like, if Australia was to entertain the lunacy of civilian nuclear power, we would not see a single watt generated from that technology inside of 15 years, right? That's the reality of it, by which time it would be, 2038, and 2050 would be only a decade away. But it would be ferociously expensive. It's inflexible. It's not what our evolving energy system needs. And it comes with all these risks. I mean, again, I don't know why the member for Sturt was so blithe or flippant about the risks of nuclear technology. We see in the current conflict in Ukraine, the largest nuclear reactor in that country, Zaporizhzhia, on a number of occasions in jeopardy because of the nature of the conflict, with the possibility that its power supply would be interdicted. If that was to happen, if you lose the ability to run your cooling systems, you basically get Chernobyl all over again. And people said when 3 Mile Island happened, that'll never happen again, and then Chernobyl, that'll never happen again. Then, of course, we had Fukushima, and an incredibly technologically savvy and developed and sophisticated country like Japan, which is now putting tons and tons and tons of irradiated water into the Pacific Ocean because there's nothing else that they're going to do. The cleanup for Fukushima will run for another 25 years. It's going to be $600 billion plus by the time it's finished. I mean, that is the reality. So you can have the nuclear fantasy, you can have the nuclear dreamland, where suddenly a technology after 70 years becomes miraculously cheap and safe in a way that it has never proved to be. An industry that still, after all those 70 years, doesn't have anywhere to put the high-level waste that gets produced. There's still nowhere on Earth that gets stored. Or you can have sanity, You can have renewable energy and energy efficiency and storage and all the things that the Albanese Labor government is putting in place as we chart a path towards net zero by 2050.
The question is that the